All right, so you're here with us on the deep dive, and today we're going to be looking at something that, I think is pretty interesting.
Okay.
And that is we're going to be making a venison loin in a crock pot. And I think a lot of people maybe haven't worked with venison that much, and they might think, oh, crock pot venison, is that like, super fancy gourmet food?
Yeah.
Like, how do I even approach that?
Right.
But the cool thing is we're going to be taking all of our cues today from the great folks over at the Fork and Fry podcast.
Awesome.
They have a fantastic recipe that lays all of this out. And our goal here on the deep dive, as always, is to give you the information as efficiently as possible.
Absolutely.
So you can, be off and running and making this delicious food yourself.
Yeah, I love that they took something that can seem a little intimidating like venison loin and made it totally doable,
Yeah.
especially for people who maybe are newer to cooking or just want to try something different.
Yeah, and it's a great recipe, and it's not as complicated as you might think.
Yeah.
So let's dive right in. First of all, what are we going to need to make this recipe?
All right, so the star of the show is obviously venison loin,
Okay.
about 2 pounds of it. And the recipe specifically says trimmed venison loin. So that's our first little pro tip right there.
Okay, so 2 pounds trimmed venison loin. What does that trimming mean?
So with venison, you really want to trim off any excess fat. And there's this silvery membrane called silver skin that you want to get rid of too.
Interesting. Okay, so why is that so important with venison?
Well, unlike some other meats, venison fat doesn't always render that nicely in a slow cooker.
Ah, I see.
And that silver skin can get really tough and chewy even after hours of cooking.
Makes sense. So we want to avoid a mouthful of chewy silver skin.
Exactly. By
Yeah.
trimming it off, you're guaranteeing a much better eating experience.
Mm.
In the end, the meat will be tender and flavorful.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like prepping the venison to be its best self for the slow cooker.
I like that. Yeah, prepping it to be its best self.
Okay, so 2 pounds of trimmed venison loin, we've got that. What else is going on in this recipe?
Then we've got a pretty good mix of veggies going on here. We need a pound of baby potatoes, quarter 3 carrots peeled and chopped, 3 celery stalks, diced a large onion chopped, and 4 cloves of minced garlic.
Wow, that's a lot of vegetables. It sounds like this is going to be like a hearty meal.
It definitely is. They're not just there for show either. Those veggies add a ton of flavor as they cook with the venison. They soak up all the juices and really round out the dish.
And it's all happening in one pot, so that's a bonus too.
Absolutely. Less cleanup, always a win.
Okay, so we've got our venison, we've got our vegetables. What's next?
Now for the flavor enhancers, this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
We've got thyme, rosemary, garlic powder, Worcestershire sauce,
Mm.
and red wine.
Oh, wow, that's a delicious combination. Even just hearing those ingredients,
Yeah.
it just makes me want to dig in.
So each of those ingredients plays a special role. The thyme and rosemary bring that earthy, woozy flavor that pairs so well with gamey meats like venison.
Yeah, those are classic pairings for sure.
Then the garlic powder adds a nice base of garlic flavor throughout the dish.
Okay.
And Worcestershire sauce, that's kind of a secret weapon for adding umami.
Umami, that's the savory, rich flavor, right?
Exactly. It's
Okay,
what makes
perfect.
things like steak and mushrooms taste so satisfying. And it really deepens the flavor profile of this dish.
I see. So it's like adding another layer of complexity.
Exactly. And then we have red wine, which adds a touch of acidity and complexity. It helps to tenderize the meat and creates a more nuanced sauce.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about the flavor of the wine itself. It actually has a chemical effect on the meat and the sauce.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how it all works together.
So we've prepped our venison, we've chopped our vegetables, we've got our flavor enhancers all ready to go. What's the first step in actually putting this dish together?
First things first, we need to season that venison loin.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Generously with salt, pepper, and garlic powder. Make sure you really coat the meat with those seasonings.
So just your basic salt and pepper and then some garlic powder to start building that flavor?
Yeah, exactly. Salt does more than just make things taste salty.
Mm.
It also helps to enhance the natural flavors of the meat. And the pepper adds a little bit of warmth. And then, of course, that initial layer of garlic powder starts building that flavor profile from the beginning.
Right, so it's like we're setting the stage for all those delicious flavors to come together later on.
Precisely.
Okay, so seasoned venison is ready to go. What's next?
Now, this might seem a little counterintuitive for a slow cooker recipe, but we're going to sear the venison in a skillet before it goes into the crock pot.
Really? I wouldn't have thought of that. Why is searing important if we're going to be slow cooking it for hours anyway?
It's all about building flavor and texture. Searing creates what's called the Maillard reaction. It's a chemical reaction that happens when the surface of the meat browns and it creates hundreds of different flavor compounds that you just can't get from slow cooking alone.
Oh, wow. So even though it's a short burst of heat, it has a big impact on the final dish.
It really does. It adds a whole other dimension of flavor. Plus, searing helps to create a little bit of a barrier that can help to keep some of the juices inside the meat during the long cook.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about flavor, it also helps with the juiciness of the meat.
Yeah, it's like we're giving the venison a head start on deliciousness.
Okay, so we've seared our venison. What happens next?
Now it's time to assemble everything in the crock pot.
Okay, so what's the best way to do that?
You want to start by placing the seared venison in the crock pot, and then you're going to surround it with all those chopped vegetables that we prepped earlier.
So we're basically making a bed of vegetables for the venison to rest on.
That's a good way to put it. The vegetables will cook evenly and soak up all those delicious juices from the venison. As it cooks, some people even like to put a layer of vegetables on the bottom of the crock pot to slightly elevate the meat.
Okay, that's a good tip. I'll have to remember that.
It's a little trick that can help to ensure everything cooks perfectly.
So venison is nestled in its bed of vegetables. What comes next?
Now it's time for the liquids. We're going to pour in the red wine, beef broth, and Worcestershire sauce.
Ah, yes, the flavor trifecta.
Exactly. The red wine, as we mentioned earlier, brings that acidity and complexity. The beef broth is the primary cooking liquid. It keeps the venison moist and helps to blend all the flavors together. And the Worcestershire sauce just continues to build that deep, savory umami character that makes this dish so special.
I see. So they all work together to create the perfect sauce.
Exactly. And they also help to distribute the heat evenly throughout the crock pot.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got our liquids in. What's left?
Last but not least, we're going to add our herbs, thyme, rosemary, and a little bit more garlic powder.
More garlic powder. Interesting. So we're adding garlic at multiple stages of the process.
That's right. By using garlic powder, both at the beginning when we season the venison and now with the herbs we're layering the garlic flavor, it adds a depth and complexity that you wouldn't get from just adding it once.
Oh, I see. So it's like we're creating a symphony of garlic flavor.
Exactly. Each layer builds upon the last, creating a more well-rounded and nuanced garlic note in the final dish.
I'm starting to get really hungry just thinking about this.
Me too. It's a pretty irresistible combination of flavors.
All right, so everything is in the crock pot. Now, what do we do?
Now comes the hard part. We wait.
The waiting game.
We're going to let this cook on low for about 8 hours or on high for 4 to 5 hours.
So there's some flexibility there depending on your schedule.
Exactly, but keep in mind that the longer, slower cook on low generally yields the most tender results.
Okay, so low and slow is the way to go for melt-in-your-mouth venison.
Precisely that long, gentle heat helps to break down the tough connective tissues in the meat, which is what makes it so tender.
So it's almost like the slow cooker is doing all the work for us.
It pretty much is, which is one of the things that makes this recipe so great.
And while we're waiting, is there anything we need to keep an eye on?
Yes, absolutely. The fork and fry recipe stresses the importance of checking the internal temperature of the venison.
Okay. And what temperature are we looking for?
You want to aim for 145 degrees Fahrenheit for medium rare to medium venison.
Okay, so why is hitting that specific temperature so important?
It's all about food safety and doneness. You want to make sure the venison is cooked through enough to kill any potential bacteria, but you also don't want to overcook it.
Right, because overcooked venison can be dry and tough.
Exactly. So using a meat thermometer is essential. It takes the guesswork out of it and helps you to achieve the perfect level of doneness.
So a meat thermometer is our friend when it comes to cooking venison.
It's definitely a must-have.
Okay, so we've patiently waited. Our venison has reached the perfect temperature. What happens now?
Don't slice into it just yet.
Oh, there's more.
We need to let the venison rest for a few minutes after it comes out of the crock pot.
Really? Why is that so important?
When meat cooks, the muscle fibers contract and squeeze out some of the juices towards the center.
Okay.
If you cut into it right away, all those juices will just spill out onto your cutting board.
Ah, so we want to keep all those delicious juices inside the meat.
Exactly. By letting the venison rest for 5 to 10 minutes, you give those muscle fibers a chance to relax and reabsorb the moisture.
So that resting period helps to ensure a juicier, more flavorful final product.
That makes a world of difference.
Okay, so we've rested our venison now. Can we finally eat?
Now comes the best part.
I've been waiting for this.
It's time to slice that beautiful venison and serve it up with all those tender vegetables and that rich, flavorful sauce.
It sounds amazing.
It really is. And what's so great about this recipe is that the slow cooker does most of the work for you. It's a relatively hands-off way to create a meal that feels really special.
It's like a gourmet meal without all the fuss.
Exactly. It's perfect for a weeknight dinner or even a special occasion.
Okay, so let's recap some of the key takeaways from the fork and fry recipe. What are the most important things to remember when making crockpot venison loin?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, always trim the fat and silver skin from the venison. It makes a huge difference in the final texture.
Okay, got it. Trim that venison.
Then even though it's a slow cooker recipe, don't skip searing the venison. That Maillard reaction is key for building flavor.
Sear it for that extra flavor boost.
The recipe gives you options for cooking on low or high, so you can adjust the cooking time to fit your schedule.
Okay, that's helpful to have that flexibility.
But as we mentioned earlier, low and slow is the way to go for the most tender results.
Low and slow it is.
And speaking of results, make sure you use a meat thermometer to check that the venison reaches 145 degrees Fahrenheit internally. That's essential for both food safety and achieving the perfect level of doneness.
Right. A meat thermometer is a must-have for this recipe.
And finally, let that venison rest for a few minutes before you slice it. It's worth the wait.
Patience is a virtue, especially when it comes to delicious food.
Couldn't agree more.
So to sum it all up, for juicy crock-pot venison loin, trim it, well, sear it for flavor. Layer it with vegetables, liquids, and herbs. Cook it low and slow until it reaches 145 degrees Fahrenheit internally. And then let it rest before slicing. Follow those steps, and you'll have a truly delicious meal.
You got it. It's that simple.
And for those of you listening who want the full recipe with all the details, head over to www.forkandafry.com site.
That's where you'll find the complete step-by-step instructions, the exact measurements, and maybe even some extra tips from the fork and fry experts.
And if you try out this recipe, we'd love to hear about it.
Share your experiences, your photos, your feedback, anything you'd like on the Fork and Fry social media pages.
Let them know that you heard about it on the deep dive.
We always love to see what our listeners are cooking up.
And before we go, I have one final thought for you to consider.
Okay, I'm listening.
Now that you've learned these techniques for slow cooking, searing, and resting meat, think about how you could adapt them to other types of game, or even tougher cuts of beef or pork.
That's a great idea.
Could you create your own delicious variations using these same principles?
I bet you could. The possibilities are endless.
That's the beauty of cooking. It's all about experimentation and creativity.
Absolutely. So go forth and experiment.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It was a pleasure being here.
And until next time, happy cooking. We hope to see your delicious creations online.
See you next time.
Bye.